She entered the courtroom as someone already wounded by life, but unwilling to accept any more scars from others. What seemed to be just an unequal divorce revealed a dark scheme of fraud, manipulation, and violence. Faced with the evidence and the ex-husband's outburst of rage, justice finally dismantled the deceit. And in that very moment began the rebirth of a woman who chose to turn pain into strength and silence into voice. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you are watching us from. Let's continue. I promise you this is going to be the best story you will ever listen to. Marianne Smith pushed open the doors of the Brighton County Courthouse, her shoulders firm and her heart pounding. At 42, this woman with brown hair tied in a discreet bun carried on her back 20 years of a marriage that from the outside seemed perfect, but which internally had become a minefield of lies and silences. The slender heel of her shoes echoed down the marble corridor as she clutched her handbag tightly, as if the object could give her the courage she needed to face what was to come. Beside her, Dr. Eleanor Carter walked with determined steps. The 45-year-old lawyer had an air of resolve that inspired confidence. Her dark, penetrating eyes missed no detail of the surroundings, and her upright posture showed years of experience in the toughest courtrooms of the county seat. She was known for defending women in complicated situations, and her reputation had reached Marianne through a mutual friend. The courtroom was cold that June morning. Marianne sat beside Eleanor and took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in her hands. Across the table, Richard Smith adjusted the knot of his Italian tie with his usual vanity. At 48, the real estate magnate maintained the impeccable appearance he had cultivated since youth. Grey hair slicked back, a tailored navy suit, and a Swiss watch worth more than a popular car. His smile was wide and confident, as if this hearing were just another business meeting from which he would emerge victorious. And beside him, in a chair that should have been empty, sat Jessica Roberts. The 26-year-old woman wore a red dress far too tight for the solemnity of the environment. Her platinum blonde hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and she chewed gum disdainfully while fiddling with her phone, completely oblivious to the protocol of the place. Marianne felt her stomach churn at the sight. It was as if Richard wanted to rub in her face the humiliation of being replaced by a younger, less questioning version. Judge Clarence Miller entered the room in his flowing black robe. He was a 60-year-old man, known for his serious and impartial demeanor. His blue eyes swept the room and paused on Jessica. The expression on his face changed immediately. "You?" he said in a grave voice, pointing at the young woman. "Who are you, madam? And what is the reason for your presence at this divorce hearing?" Richard promptly stood up, displaying that rehearsed smile Marianne knew so well. "Your Honor, this is Ms. Jessica Roberts, my personal assistant. She is here to assist me with documents and administrative matters related to the process." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Smith, this is a sensitive family matter. It is not appropriate to bring companions who are not lawyers or interested parties. I request that the young lady leave immediately." Jessica scoffed, tossing her gum into the trash with ill grace. Richard touched her arm with false gentleness, whispering something in her ear. She stood up, grabbed her designer purse and swayed out, casting a scornful glance at Marianne before slamming the door. The silence that followed was awkward. Marianne felt her eyes sting, but refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Eleanor placed her hand over hers under the table, a discreet gesture of support. "We may proceed," the judge said, flipping through the documents before him. "We are here to approve the consensual divorce agreement between the parties. Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, do you both agree to the terms presented?" Richard stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor. The agreement provides for the equal division of assets acquired during the marriage, as stated in the records. My client," he paused deliberately, "pardon me, my ex-wife will receive 50% of the declared assets, in addition to child support for our minor children." Marianne looked at Eleanor, who maintained a neutral expression. They had talked at length about this moment. The agreement seemed fair on the surface, but both knew something was wrong. Richard was too rich for the division to be so simple. There were hidden assets, Marianne was sure of it, but proving it was another story. "Mrs. Smith," the judge turned to her, "do you agree to the terms?" Before Marianne could answer, Eleanor stood up. "Your Honor, we request the suspension of the agreement's approval. We have reasons to believe there are irregularities in the documents presented by the opposing party." Richard's lawyer, Dr. Mark Collins, a 50-year-old stout man with gold-rimmed glasses, immediately rose. "Your Honor, this is absurd. All documents have been duly presented and are in accordance with the law. This is just another attempt to delay the process and harm my client." Eleanor was unfazed. "Your Honor, in recent weeks we have conducted a parallel investigation into Mr. Smith's financial movements. We have discovered serious inconsistencies that need to be clarified before any approval." The judge raised his hand, asking for silence. "Dr. Carter, do you have proof of these alleged irregularities?" "I do, Your Honor." Eleanor opened her executive briefcase and pulled out a brown envelope. "Here are bank statements, transfer, receipts and documents demonstrating that Mr. Smith has concealed significant assets from this process. There are undeclared properties abroad, accounts in the names of third parties, and a substantial life insurance policy in the name of the young lady who just left this room." Marianne felt her heart pound. Eleanor had done it. Weeks of investigation, secret meetings with a private investigator, sleepless nights analyzing documents. It had all been worth it. She saw Richard's face lose color for a fraction of a second before he recomposed his mask of confidence. "Your Honor, this is a farce." Richard slammed the table. "These accusations are unfounded and defamatory. I demand they be disregarded." The judge took the envelope from Eleanor's hands and began to examine the documents. The silence in the room was deafening. Marianne could hear her own heart beating in her ears. Each second seemed an eternity as the judge turned the pages, frowning as he read. After what seemed like hours, but was only 5 minutes, Judge Clarence Miller looked up. "Mr. Smith, these documents are quite concerning. I see here transfers to offshore companies, acquisition of properties in Miami not declared in this process, and indeed, a life insurance policy worth £2 million in the name of Ms. Jessica Roberts." Richard was visibly nervous now, sweat beginning to mark his immaculate forehead. "Your Honor, I can explain all of this. These are legitimate investments of my company. They have no relation to marital assets." The judge interrupted him with a firm gesture. "Mr. Smith, houses and life insurance policies are not routine business investments. Furthermore, I see here that some of these transfers were made with signatures that, according to the attached expert report by Dr. Carter, show indications of forgery." The bomb had been dropped. "Dr. Collins began to stammer, asking for time to analyze the documents, claiming he needed to consult his client. Richard was pale, his hands trembling as he frantically flipped through his own papers, as if he could find a magical way out of the situation. Marianne, for the first time in months, felt something akin to hope. She looked at Eleanor, who returned a serene and professional gaze. This woman had become more than her lawyer. She was her ally, her confidant, the person who had believed in her when even her own children doubted. "Given the foregoing," the judge gently struck his gavel, the sound echoing through the room like thunder, "I declare the presented agreement invalid. This process will be converted into a contested divorce with determination of fault. I order the immediate freeze of all bank accounts and assets in the name of Mr. Richard Smith until the origins and destinations of the assets in question are clarified. I schedule an evidentiary hearing for 30 days from now. The session is adjourned." It was at that moment that something inside Richard snapped. The sound of the judge's gavel still echoed in the room, when Richard Smith abruptly stood up, knocking his chair backward. His face, previously pale, was now red with rage, his bulging eyes fixed on Marianne with a terrifying intensity she had never seen before, not even in their worst marital arguments. "You did this!" He pointed a finger at her, his voice hoarse and laden with hatred. "You set this all up, you viper, you liar! Mr. Smith, control yourself." The judge stood up, alarmed. "You are in contempt of court." But Richard heard nothing more. It was as if all the years of manipulation, lies, and control had accumulated within him, and now exploded, all at once. He circled the table with long strides, ignoring his lawyer's shouts and the judge's orders. Marianne instinctively stood up, terror gripping her body. Eleanor placed herself in front of her, but Richard violently pushed her aside. "You'll pay for this, you'll pay me back." Richard lunged at Marianne, and before anyone could react, his clenched fist struck her face with brutal force. The crack reverberated through the room like a gunshot. Marianne felt the pain exploding in her face, her vision darkening for an instant. Her body was thrown backward, hitting the table before falling to the marble floor. The taste of blood flooded her mouth. She heard distant screams as if she were underwater. "Hold that man!" The judge's voice thundered through the room. "Call security! Call an ambulance!" Eleanor knelt beside Marianne, shouting her name repeatedly. Don't move, Mary, help is coming." 2 courthouse security guards burst into the room and tackled Richard, who was still trying to reach Marianne again, incoherent shouts spilling from his mouth. It took a 3rd guard to finally immobilize him. The metallic handcuffs clinked as they were fastened to his wrists as he was dragged out of the room, still screaming threats and obscenities. Marianne was semi-conscious on the floor, her vision blurry, feeling the swelling rapidly forming on her face. She tried to focus on the faces around her. Eleanor held her hand, saying reassuring words that she could barely process. The judge had come out from behind the bench and was authoritatively coordinating the procedures. Dr. Collins, Richard's lawyer, leaned against the wall, pale as paper, murmuring that he didn't know his client was capable of such a thing. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. One of them, a young man in a green uniform, knelt beside Marianne and began to examine her injuries with professional care. "Ma'am, can you hear me? How many fingers am I holding up?" Marianne blinked, trying to focus. 3, she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Good, that's good. We're going to take you to the hospital for some tests, okay? You're safe now." As she was placed on the stretcher, Marianne saw Eleanor talking intensely with the judge. Through the haze of pain, she managed to catch a few words. "Arrest in flagrante delicto, nurse violence, protective order, ma urgency." The judge nodded, his face grave and determined. At St. Jude's Hospital, Marianne was immediately taken to the emergency room. Doctors performed examinations, took x-rays, assessed possible fractures. Fortunately, despite the swelling and bruises that were already forming in shades of purple and blue, nothing was broken. The punch had hit her cheek and jaw area, but had not caused permanent damage. "You were very lucky," the on-call doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, said as she applied cold compresses. "The impact was strong, but it didn't hit more sensitive areas. We'll keep you under observation for a few hours and then you can go home. I've prescribed anti-inflammatories and painkillers for the pain." Eleanor did not leave Marianne's side for a moment. She had called psychologist Beatrice Adams, Marianne's best friend, who arrived at the hospital in less than half an hour. Beatrice was a 40-year-old woman with curly hair and brown eyes full of compassion. When she saw her friend's bruised face, her tears fell freely. "My God, Marie," she held Marianne's hand gently. "I knew he was bad, but I never imagined it would come to this." "No one imagined," Marianne replied with difficulty, her mouth still sore. "Not even I." The following hours were a blur of medical procedures, police statements and phone calls. Eleanor coordinated everything with military efficiency. She had managed to have the judge immediately issue an emergency protective order, prohibiting Richard from approaching Marianne within 500 yards. He was detained at the police station, facing charges of assault, contempt of court, and resisting arrest. "And there's more," Eleanor said, showing her phone screen to Marianne. The hearing was recorded by the courthouse security cameras. Everything was captured, every word, every movement. This will be crucial for the criminal case. Marianne closed her eyes, feeling a mix of relief and dread. It was good to have concrete proof, but the humiliation of having that moment of violence recorded forever weighed on her chest. "Marie," Beatrice approached, her voice soft but firm. "You need to tell the children. They'll find out anyway. It's better if it comes from you." The children. Peter was 19 and in his 2nd year of engineering at Brighton University. Laura was 16 and in her 2nd year of high school. Both had been confused and divided during the divorce process. Richard had worked hard to turn the children against their mother, claiming she was being selfish, that she wanted to destroy the family, that she was making things up out of jealousy. Peter, especially, had distanced himself from Marianne in recent months. He had always been closer to his father, admired his position, his business success. Richard had convinced his son that Marianne was going through a period of emotional instability, that she was being manipulated by the feminist lawyer, as he used to call Eleanor disdainfully. "I'll call them," Marianne said, picking up her phone with trembling hands. The call to Laura was painful. The girl cried copiously on the other end of the line, saying she was coming to the hospital immediately. Peter was more difficult. When Marianne told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end. "Mom, what did you do to make him so angry?" he finally asked, his voice cold. Marianne felt as if she had been hit a second time. "Peter, your father assaulted me in front of the judge, the lawyers, everyone. He was arrested. The cameras filmed everything. But there must be a reason, Mom. Dad isn't a violent person. You must have said something. You must have provoked him. Somehow." Beatrice, who was listening to the conversation, snatched the phone from Marianne's hand. "Peter Smith, it's me, Aunt B. Come to St. Jude's Hospital now. See with your own eyes what your father did to your mother. And if after that you still think she provoked something, then we'll talk about who raised you to think that way." She hung up without waiting for an answer. Marianne was crying silently, tears burning in the wounds on her face. How had it come to this? How could her own son doubt her after everything? Laura arrived first, accompanied by a friend. When she saw her mother's face, she sobbed loudly and ran to hug her. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't believe you before." "It's okay, honey, it's okay now." Marianne stroked her daughter's blonde hair, so similar to her own. "I'm fine, I'm alive." Peter arrived an hour later. He entered the room with a closed expression, his hands in his jeans pockets. But when his eyes fell on his mother's swollen, bruised face, his mask of indifference cracked. He stopped halfway, his chin trembling. "Mum," was all he could say before breaking down in tears. Marianne extended her arms, and her son knelt beside the hospital bed, burying his face in her shoulder as he cried as he hadn't since childhood. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I should have seen it." At 7 in the evening, Marianne was discharged from the hospital. Eleanor had arranged for her to stay at Beatrice's house for the next few days until the situation calmed down and the protective order was fully in effect. Beatrice's house was in Kensington, a cozy apartment filled with plants and psychology books. Marianne lay on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling while holding an ice pack against her face. 3 days had passed since the incident at the courthouse, and the story had spread through the city like wildfire. The video of the assault, captured by the courthouse security cameras, had leaked to the press. No one knew exactly how, but within 48 hours, the entire country had watched those shocking images. Richard Smith, the successful and respected businessman, assaulting his ex-wife in the middle of the courthouse, being restrained by security guards, handcuffed and taken to jail. The news wouldn't talk about anything else. Newspapers blared indignant headlines. Social media was buzzing with comments supporting Marianne and condemning Richard. Television programs debated domestic violence, emotional manipulation, and psychological abuse. Marianne Smith's name had become a symbol of courage for women across the country. But there on that sofa, Marianne didn't feel courageous. She felt exhausted, humiliated, and frightened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's fist coming towards her. Every loud noise made her jump. Sleep was hard to find, and when it finally came, it brought nightmares. Beatrice entered the room with 2 cups of chamomile tea. She sat in the armchair, beside the sofa, and handed a cup to her friend. "Drink slowly, it's hot." Marianne gratefully accepted the drink. "Thank you, B, for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't need to thank me, Mary. That's what friends are for." Beatrice took a sip of her own tea before continuing. "You know, I was thinking, do you want to talk about the signs? About how we got here?" Marianne sighed deeply. The signs. Yes, they were always there, she admitted, her voice low and laden with guilt. I just didn't want to see them. It's not your fault you didn't see them, Mari. Men like Richard are masters at hiding who they really are. They build such perfect masks that sometimes even they believe them. Marianne closed her eyes, letting memory take her back. Maybe I should have noticed at the beginning. Remember that birthday dinner of his about 5 years ago? Beatrice frowned, trying to remember. The one at the Italian restaurant, when you arrived late. Exactly. Marianne took another sip of tea, feeling the warm liquid go down her throat. I was late because Peter had a problem at school and I had to pick him up. When I got to the restaurant, Richard was with those important clients of his. I apologized, explained the situation, but he smiled and said it was fine, that he understood. And what was wrong with that? At the time, nothing, but on the way home, he changed completely. He said I had humiliated him in front of his clients, that I always made excuses to disrupt his business, that if I were more organized, I could manage my time better. Marianne paused, reliving that painful moment. And the worst part is that I believed him. I spent weeks blaming myself, thinking I really had been a bad wife. Beatrice shook her head, recognizing the pattern. That's classic gaslighting, Mari. He made you question your own perception of reality. And there's more, Marianne continued, the floodgates of memory now completely open. The smells. I started to notice he would come home with different perfumes, women's perfumes. When I asked, he would laugh and say he had hugged a client or that he had been in a department store shopping for me. He always had such a reasonable explanation that I felt foolish for questioning. You weren't foolish. You were being manipulated by someone who knew your insecurities and knew exactly how to exploit them. Marianne remembered another, more recent episode. About a year ago, he started traveling much more for work, always to London, always important meetings that lasted for days. One weekend I was packing his suitcase to wash his clothes and found a hotel receipt in Brighton from the day he was supposedly in London. And you confronted him? I did. Marianne laughed without humor. He got furious, said I was spying on him, that I didn't trust him, that I was creating problems where none existed. He explained that the receipt was from a meeting that had been rescheduled at the last minute and that he had forgotten to tell me. He made me feel like a paranoid, controlling wife. Beatrice stood up and walked to the window, looking at the busy street below. And the coldness? When did it start? Marianne thought for a moment. I think it was always there in a way, but it intensified over time. He stopped touching me, stopped truly kissing me. When we made love, and that became increasingly rare, it was mechanical, distant. He was physically there, but absent in every other sense. And the children? Did they notice? Laura did, yes. She asked me several times if Daddy and Mommy were fighting. I always denied it, said everything was fine, that it was just his work stress. Marianne felt tears begin to flow. I was protecting a liar and destroying my own credibility with my daughter. And Peter. Peter idealized his father. Still does, despite everything. Richard was always very careful to maintain the image of a perfect father. He took Peter to play football, went to school presentations, was always present on social media posting. Pictures of a dedicated father. Marianne wiped away tears with the back of her hand. What I didn't know was that behind the scenes, he was planting seeds of doubt about me in our son's head. What do you mean? I found out later through Laura. She told me Richard talked to Peter about my supposed emotional instability. He said I was going through early menopause, that women of that age became unbalanced, that I was making things up out of insecurity. Marianne felt anger rising in her throat. He was preparing the ground for when I finally decided to leave him. He wanted the children to side with him. Beatrice returned to the armchair and held Marianne's hands firmly. But you finally made the decision. What made you wake up? It was a combination of things. Marianne took a deep breath. But the decisive moment was 6 months ago. I was at the market and ran into an acquaintance, Sonia, remember her? The yoga teacher. That's right. We started talking, and she casually mentioned that she had seen Richard at a restaurant the previous weekend. With a very young woman, she said. very affectionate with each other. Marianne felt her stomach churn remembering that moment. That weekend, Richard had said he was in London, but Sonia had seen him in Brighton at a romantic restaurant in Chelsea with another woman. The lie was crumbling. I came home and went straight to his office. I started looking for evidence, anything, and I found so much, B. I felt sick. What did you find? Messages on his computer. He had forgotten to log out of his email account. They were messages to Jessica, that girl who was with him at the courthouse. Explicit messages, planning dates, talking about love, about a future together. Marianne felt the bitter taste of betrayal returning to her mouth. There were even conversations about how he was going to get rid of me, about how he was going to make sure I ended up with as little as possible in the separation. My God, Marie. But it wasn't just betrayal, B. It was more. There were financial documents, transfers to accounts I had never seen, receipts for property purchases he never told me about, a life insurance policy in her name, imagine. Marianne laughed bitterly. 20 years of marriage and he took out a life insurance policy for his 26-year-old mistress. That's when you came to me, Beatrice said, recalling their conversation on that rainy December day. It was. You were in your kitchen baking that carrot cake I love. I arrived crying, desperate, not knowing what to do. And you said something that changed everything. Beatrice smiled gently. I said you didn't need to prove you deserved respect, that you just needed to walk away from anyone who didn't give you that. Exactly. In that moment, something clicked inside me. I realized I was asking permission to be treated with dignity. I was accepting crumbs from a man who hadn't valued me for years. Marianne looked at her friend with deep gratitude. You woke me up, B. You made me see that I deserved more. It was Beatrice who recommended Eleanor Carter. The two knew each other from a women's support group that Beatrice coordinated as a volunteer. Eleanor occasionally participated, offering free legal guidance to attendees, but her personal story was what truly connected her to those women. Marianne still remembered her first meeting with Eleanor in a discreet cafe in downtown Brighton. It was January, the heat was stifling, and she had arrived. At the meeting, sweating nervously. Eleanor was sitting at a table in the back, wearing a grey suit and reading glasses, reviewing documents. Marianne? Eleanor had asked, looking up. Please, sit down. Would you like coffee? Water? Just water, thank you, Marianne had replied, sitting awkwardly. Eleanor ordered their drinks and then fixed her dark eyes on Marianne. Beatrice told me a little about your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you. Take your time, at your own pace. And Marianne told everything. She spoke of 20 years of marriage, of betrayals, lies, manipulations. She spoke of the fear she felt, the shame of taking so long to react, the guilt of destroying her family. Eleanor listened in silence, making occasional notes, her face maintaining a professional yet compassionate expression. When Marianne finished, she was crying. Eleanor pushed a box of tissues across the table and waited patiently for her to compose herself. Marianne, Eleanor finally said, her voice firm but gentle, everything you've told me is very serious. We're talking about a complex case of psychological manipulation, asset concealment, and likely several financial crimes. This won't be easy or quick. I know, Marianne replied, wiping away her tears. But I have to do this. For myself, for my daughters, for the example I want to set for them. Eleanor smiled for the first time. Then let's do it right. But first, I need to tell you something. I need you to know who I am and why I do what I do. And then Eleanor told her story. She had been married at 25 to a brilliant and charming lawyer. On the outside, they were the perfect couple. On the inside, she lived a nightmare of control and psychological abuse. He controlled her money, her friendships, her clothes, even her reading. He said it was protection, that it was love. It took me 5 years to get out, Eleanor recounted, her gaze distant for a moment. When I finally decided to separate, I discovered he had transferred all our assets to his mother's name. I was left with nothing, no home, no savings, no dignity. And what did you do? I went back to school. I had dropped out of law school in my 3rd year to get married. I went back, finished my degree, passed the bar and specialized in family law. Eleanor looked directly into Marianne's eyes. I swore that no other woman would go through what I went through if I could prevent it, so that's what I do. I fight for women like you, for women like I once was. At that moment, Marianne knew she had found not just a lawyer, but an ally. Someone who understood her pain because she had walked through the same hell. In the months that followed, Eleanor and Marianne worked in absolute silence. It was crucial that Richard suspected nothing. Marianne continued living in the same house, sleeping in the same room, pretending nothing had changed. But inside she was preparing for war. Eleanor hired a private investigator, a former police officer named Robert, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Discreetly, he began to follow Richard, documenting his movements, his meetings with Jessica, his mysterious trips. For 3 months, Marianne collected evidence. She photographed documents when Richard was in the shower. She recorded conversations when he spoke on the phone with his partners. She noted dates, times, details of his absences. It was like living a double life, and the weight of that duplicity was overwhelming. There were times when I wanted to give up, Marianne Ace confessed to Beatrice, now lying on the sofa. Times when I thought it would be easier to just accept what he offered and move on. But you didn't give up. I didn't give up because Eleanor showed me how much I was losing. Robert discovered that Richard had at least 4 properties abroad that were never declared. He had accounts in tax havens. He had investments in shell companies. Marianne shook her head, still incredulous at the extent of the fraud. He was embezzling money from his own company, stealing from partners, employees, everyone. And the life insurance? Ah, the insurance. Marianne laughed bitterly. £2 million in Jessica's name, taken out less than a year ago. If something happened to me, she would be rich. A chill ran down Beatrice's spine. Mary, do you think he might have planned? I don't know, Marianne interrupted quickly, and I prefer not to think about it. What matters is that Eleanor got all the evidence we needed. Every suspicious transfer, every forged document, every recorded lie. Eleanor's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. They would wait until the day of the agreement approval hearing. Richard would be confident, thinking he had won. And then, at the right moment, they would present the evidence. The element of surprise would be devastating. And that's exactly what happened, Beatrice commented. Did you see his face when the judge started reading the documents? I did. Marianne smiled for the first time in days. It was the first time in 20 years that I saw Richard Smith out of control, without his mask of a successful businessman, without his well-rehearsed lies. He was just a small, scared man, confronted with his own actions. But no one expected him to react with violence, Beatrice said softly. Not even I, Marianne admitted. Eleanor warned me that he might try to intimidate me, threaten me, but to hit me in front of the judge, the lawyers, the cameras. She paused. I think he really lost control. For the first time, someone was truly challenging him, and he didn't know how to handle it. Marianne's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Eleanor. Marianne answered on speakerphone. Marie, how are you? The lawyer's concerned voice echoed through the room. Better, Eleanor. Still sore, but better. Great. Look, I have news. The federal prosecutor's office is filing a criminal case against Richard. It's not just the assault. They investigated the documents we presented and discovered that the asset concealment scheme is much larger than we imagined. What do you mean? He wasn't acting alone. There's a group of businessmen, at least 5 we've identified so far, who used the same scheme. They created offshore companies, transferred assets, defrauded income tax declarations. It's a large-scale operation. Marianne felt her jaw drop. And what does that mean for me? It means the case has gained national proportions. The federal prosecutor's office is already involved. They want your testimony not just against Richard, but about the entire scheme. You will become a key witness in a large-scale operation. Marianne felt the weight of that responsibility. I'll do whatever it takes, she said with determination. If this can help other women not go through what I went through, I'll do it. I knew you'd say that. Eleanor sighed. There's one more thing. Jessica is trying to make a deal with the prosecutors. Apparently, she has information about Richard's other illicit activities and is willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity. The mistress is turning witness against him? Exactly. Apparently, when things got ugly, she decided to save her own skin. There's no honor among thieves, as they say. After they hung up, Marianne remained silent, processing everything. Her life had become a whirlwind of lawsuits, investigations, and public exposure. The simple divorce she had imagined had turned into a national scandal. Beatrice gently touched her shoulder. How do you feel about all this? Scared, Marianne admitted, but also strangely at peace. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm no longer living a lie. Everything is out in the open now, no more secrets, no more masks. And the future? What do you want to do when all this is over? Marianne thought for a long moment, looking out the window at the brightened sky. I want to rebuild. I want to create something of my own, something that represents who I truly am. 6 months had passed since the day of the assault. The criminal case against Richard and his accomplices slowly moved through the legal system. He was on supervised release, wearing an electronic ankle monitor, prohibited from leaving the city or approaching Marianne. His company had been placed under receivership, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed. Marianne had won in court. The judge ruled that she was entitled to 70% of the couple's assets, considering Richard's fault and the evidence of asset concealment. The financial compensation was substantial, more than she ever imagined having. But money, she discovered, did not heal the wounds of the soul. It was Beatrice who suggested art therapy. One afternoon, she took Marianne to a pottery studio in Greenwich Village. The place was a renovated warehouse with exposed brick walls, large windows letting in the natural light of Brighton, and shelves filled with pieces at different stages of creation. The owner of the studio was a 60-year-old woman named Mrs. Carman, with white hair tied in a colourful scarf and hands stained with clay. She greeted Marianne with a warm hug, as if she knew her entire story just by looking into her eyes. "Come," Mrs. Carman said, guiding her to a potter's wheel. "Sit here. You don't need to know anything, you just need to feel." Marianne sat down, hesitant. Mrs. Carman placed a piece of damp clay in her hands. It was cold, soft, and had an earthy smell that immediately transported her back to her childhood, playing in her grandmother's backyard in Willow Creek. "Now mold it," Mrs. Carman instructed softly. "Don't think, just let your hands do the work." At first it was clumsy. The clay slipped between her fingers, wouldn't take shape, crumbled. Marianne felt frustration growing, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It was like her life, she thought, everything falling apart, shapeless, purposeless. But Mrs. Carman placed her calloused hands over Marianne's. "Breathe, child. The clay doesn't judge. It accepts your mistakes, your attempts, your imperfections. It's you who needs to accept yourself." And something inside Marianne loosened. She began to cry, tears falling onto the clay, mixing with the water and earth. And as she cried, her hands worked, molding, creating, transforming. When she finally stopped, there was a small, imperfect bowl in her hands. Crooked, asymmetrical, but existing. It was hers. "Beautiful," Mrs. Carman said, smiling. "You just created something from nothing. Remember that feeling." Marianne returned to the studio every day that week, and the next week. Pottery became her therapy, her escape, her healing process. She created vases, plates, small sculptures. Some came out beautiful, others cracked in the kiln, but each piece was a part of her being rebuilt. It was during one of those afternoons of work that the idea emerged. Marianne was talking with Mrs. Carman about how the clay had helped her process her pain when the older woman said something that changed everything. "You know, Marianne, you're not the first woman who comes here carrying this pain. Many arrive here broken and leave renewed. Clay has that power. It accepts you as you are and allows you to rebuild yourself." At that moment, Marianne had a clear vision of what she wanted to do. She wanted to create a space like this, but dedicated specifically to Women who had gone through what she had, a place of healing, of rebuilding, of rebirth. The following week she shared the idea with Eleanor and Beatrice during lunch. The three were gathered in a quiet restaurant at the Central Market, eating cheese bread and drinking coffee as Marianne enthusiastically explained her vision. It would be a pottery studio, but more than that. It would be a community space where women could meet, share their stories, learn a skill, rebuild their lives. "I wanted to call it Renaissance," Marianne said, her eyes shining for the first time in months. "A tribute to all women who choose to be reborn after pain." Eleanor smiled broadly. "It's perfect, Mari. And you have the financial resources to make this happen. The compensation you received could easily fund a project like this. And I can help by coordinating psychological support groups in the space," Beatrice added, already planning. "We can have talking circles, group therapies, self-esteem workshops." In the following months, Marianne dedicated herself body and soul to the project. She found a perfect warehouse in River North, a revitalizing area of Brighton. The space was large, with high ceilings and plenty of natural light. She hired an architect specializing in therapeutic environments to oversee the renovation. The investment was significant, but every penny was worth it. Marianne wanted Renaissance to be welcoming, inspiring, a place where women felt safe and valued. The walls were painted in soft shades of blue and green. Large windows were installed. There was an area with potter's wheels, one with tables for handicrafts, a professional kiln for firing pieces, a small kitchen, and a comfortable room for talking circles. The inauguration was in October, on a sunny spring afternoon. Marianne had publicized the project through women's support organizations, churches, community centers. She didn't want to charge participants anything. Renaissance would be sustained by the sale of the created pieces and by donations. On the first day, 8 women appeared. There was Joanna, a 50-year-old woman who had just left a 30-year abusive relationship. Carla, a 23-year-old who was rebuilding her life after a controlling relationship. Regina, a single mother of 3 children, trying to balance work and motherhood alone. Each brought her story, her pain, her hope. Marianne welcomed them with warm hugs. "Welcome to Renaissance," she said, her voice firm but emotional. "Here, you are not victims. You are survivors, warriors, artists. Here you will learn that it is possible to take the broken pieces of life and create something new and beautiful." Beatrice coordinated the first talking circle. The women sat in a circle, some shy, others eager to share. One by one they told their stories. There were tears, hugs, unexpected laughter when someone recounted an absurd detail of their situation. There was pain, but there was also strength. There was trauma, but there was also hope. After the conversation, Marianne led them to the potter's wheels. As Mrs. Carmen had done with her, she placed clay in each woman's hands. "The clay doesn't judge you," she said, repeating the wise words she had learned. "It accepts you as you are and allows you to transform." At first, it was difficult for everyone. Hands unaccustomed to manual work, fear of making mistakes, frustration when the pieces didn't come out perfect. But Marianne circulated among them, encouraging, guiding, sharing her own learning journey. "It doesn't matter if it's crooked," she would say. "The important thing is that it's yours. You created it. You have that power." As the weeks passed, Renaissance came alive. More women began to appear. Word of mouth spread through the city. There were mothers who came with their daughters, grandmothers who brought granddaughters, friends who supported friends. The space was always filled with conversations, laughter, and the comforting sound of clay being molded. The created pieces were sold in a small shop attached to the studio. Marianne established that all profits from sales would be divided among the artisans. It was a way to provide financial independence for women who had often been economically controlled in their relationships. Peter and Laura became involved in the project. Peter, now in his 3rd year of engineering, helped with the administration and accounting of the space. Laura, talented in visual arts, began painting inspirational messages on the pieces. "Love is not silence in the face of pain," a bowl would say. "Strength is starting over," a vase would declare. Her words touched the people who bought the pieces, and many returned to learn more about the project. But it was 3 months after the inauguration that something unexpected happened. A young woman of approximately 20 appeared at the door of Renaissance on a rainy December afternoon. She was thin, with large, frightened eyes, wearing simple clothes. She stood at the entrance as if unsure whether she should enter. Marianne saw her and immediately approached. "Hello, welcome. Come in, don't stand in the rain." The young woman entered hesitantly, looking around with curiosity and apprehension. "My name is Camilla," she said in a low voice. "I came because, well, I heard about this place and thought maybe it could help." "Of course it can," Marianne smiled warmly. "Everyone is welcome here." Camilla quickly integrated into the Renaissance group, but Marianne noticed something different about her. The young woman was too observant, her eyes always scanning the room, paying attention to every detail. While the other women opened up easily, sharing their stories during the talking circles, Camilla remained reserved, sharing only vague information about a complicated relationship she had recently left. In the first few weeks, Marianne attributed this behavior to natural shyness. Some women took longer to feel comfortable, but Beatrice, with her keen psychological intuition, shared her concerns with Marianne after one of the sessions. "Something's wrong with Camilla," Beatrice said, as they had coffee in the small studio kitchen. "She doesn't participate like the others. It's as if she's here for another reason." "Do you think she's lying about her story?" Marianne asked, concerned. "I don't know, but I think we should be vigilant." 2 weeks later, the situation dramatically clarified itself. It was a Friday afternoon, and the group was working on their pieces when Camilla suddenly began to cry copiously. These were not silent tears, but deep sobs that shook her entire body. All the women stopped what they were doing, surrounding her with concern. "Camilla, what happened?" Marianne knelt beside the young woman, holding her hands. Between tears and sobs, the truth finally came out. "I lied to you," Camilla confessed, her voice breaking. "I didn't come here looking for help. I was sent." "Sent?" Eleanor, who was visiting the studio that day, approached. "Sent by whom?" "By Mr. Richard Smith's lawyer." Camilla looked directly at Marianne, her red eyes full of guilt. "He paid me to come here, to infiltrate, to find out information about the assets you received, about your finances, about anything he could use to reverse the court decision." The silence that followed was absolute. All the women present looked at Camilla with a mixture of shock and betrayal. Marianne felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Richard, even on supervised release, even with his reputation destroyed, was still trying to control her. Eleanor was the first to regain her voice. "Do you have proof of this? Any communication with him or his lawyer?" "I do." Camilla wiped away her tears. "I have all the messages, the emails, even the payment receipts." She pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling hands. "I kept everything because, well, I needed to protect myself if something went wrong." "Why are you telling us this now?" Beatrice asked, her voice firm but not aggressive. Camilla looked around at the faces of the women who had become her companions in recent weeks. "Because I can't do it. These weeks here, listening to your stories, seeing your strength, what you've built together." She wiped away more tears. "My mother was like you. My father controlled her, diminished her, destroyed her self-esteem until she was nothing. I grew up seeing that, and when the lawyer offered me money to spy on you, I accepted because I was desperate, jobless, with bills to pay. But living here, I understood that I was perpetuating the same cycle of abuse that destroyed my mother." Marianne stood up, processing the revelation. Part of her wanted to expel Camilla immediately. She felt betrayed and violated. But another part, the part that had learned about forgiveness and rebuilding in recent months, understood that this young woman was also a victim of the system Richard represented. Eleanor, always practical, took control of the situation. "Camilla, I need you to come with me to the police station now. We're going to officially record all of this. This information could be crucial for the criminal case against Richard and could further worsen his legal situation." "I'll go," Camilla agreed immediately. "I'll tell everything, every detail of what he asked me to do." Before leaving, Camilla turned to Marianne. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I never passed any real information to them. I made things up, gave false data. I couldn't truly betray you." Marianne took a deep breath. "You made the right decision by telling us the truth. That took courage. When all this is over, if you want, you can come back. But as a real participant, not as a spy." Camilla nodded, new tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. After Eleanor and Camilla left, the women remained silent, processing what had happened. Joanna was the first to speak. "This shows how much these men fear us. Fear our power, our strength, our ability to rebuild ourselves. And they should be afraid," Carla added, her young voice full of determination, "because we are showing other women that it is possible to win, that it is possible to start over." Camilla's revelation had immediate consequences. Eleanor used the evidence provided by the young woman to open a new case against Richard for attempted obstruction of justice and harassment. The judge, indignant at Richard's audacity in trying to manipulate the process even on supervised release, tightened his conditions, increasing the restrictions on him. But more important than the legal consequences was the impact the situation had on Renaissance. Camilla's story spread, and more women began to seek out the studio. Women who were in similar situations, who had been manipulated, who needed a safe space to rebuild themselves. The project grew beyond Marianne's expectations. She needed to hire more pottery instructors, expand the space, add more potter's wheels. Beatrice organized a regular calendar of lectures and workshops on self-esteem, financial independence, and legal rights. It was during this period of growth that Eleanor made a discovery that would change everything again. She was reviewing documents related to Richard's case when she noticed patterns in the financial transactions that she hadn't perceived before. It wasn't just Richard who was concealing assets. There was an organized scheme involving at least 10 businessmen from Brighton's elite. "Marianne," Eleanor urgently called her for a meeting in her office, "what I discovered is bigger than we imagined." Richard was part of a group of businessmen who shared strategies for tax fraud and asset concealment. They even had a specialized accountant who created the entire structure of offshore companies and strawmen. And what does that mean? It means this case is going to explode nationally. The federal prosecutor's office is already involved. They want your testimony not just against Richard, but about the entire scheme. You will become a key witness in a large-scale operation. Marianne felt the weight of that responsibility. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said with determination. "If this can prevent others from doing the same, if this can protect other families from being destroyed by these greedy men, I'll do it." In the following weeks, the story made national headlines. Operation Renaissance, as the media dubbed it, investigated schemes of tax evasion and money laundering involving millions of pounds. Marianne was summoned to testify before a congressional inquiry committee. Her personal story became a symbol of resistance against corruption and abuse of power. The exposure was intense and, at times, brutal. Marianne received hate messages from people who defended Richard and the other businessmen. They said she was destroying hard-working men, that she was a gold digger, an opportunist. But for every negative message, she received 10 of support. Women from all over the country wrote, telling their own stories, thanking her for her courage, asking for advice. Renaissance became more than a pottery studio. It became a movement. Other groups began to emerge in different cities, inspired by Marianne's model. Women creating support spaces, using art as therapy, rebuilding themselves collectively. It was on a rainy April morning, almost a year after the assault, that Marianne received a letter. It was from Richard. He was allowed to send limited correspondence, always monitored by the court. Eleanor brought the letter personally, wanting to be present when Marianne read it. With trembling hands, Marianne opened the envelope. The handwriting was Richard's, that firm, neat script she knew so well. But the words were surprising. The letter did not ask for forgiveness. Instead, it demanded that Marianne share the profits of Renaissance with him. He claimed that the project's success was only possible because of the financial compensation she had received, compensation that came from the assets he had built. Therefore, he argued with distorted logic, he was entitled to a share of the income. He called it an emotional investment and claimed what he considered fair. Marianne finished reading the letter and, to Eleanor's surprise, began to laugh. It was not a bitter or sad laugh, but genuine, liberating. She folded the letter carefully, walked to the small kiln they used to fire the ceramic pieces at Renaissance, and threw the paper inside. The two women watched in silence as the flames consumed Richard's words, turning his audacity to ashes. "He'll never understand," Marianne said, still smiling. "He'll never understand that Renaissance wasn't built with his money. It was built with the strength of every woman who comes through here, with pain transformed into art, with the courage to start over." Eleanor placed a hand on her friend's shoulder, a gesture of silent solidarity. "You've come a long way, Mary. Look at you now." And Marianne had indeed changed. The frightened, insecure woman who had entered the courthouse a year ago no longer existed. In her place was a strong, confident woman who had found her purpose. The bruises on her face had long since disappeared, but the emotional scars had transformed into wisdom and empathy. Renaissance continued to grow. 6 months after Richard's letter, Marianne inaugurated a second unit in the South Side, a more deprived area of Brighton. She wanted the project to reach women from all social classes, not just those who had easy access to the city centre. Peter graduated in engineering and decided to dedicate his final project to the social project created by his mother. He developed a management system to optimize the production and sale of the pieces, increasing profitability and allowing more women to benefit financially. The pride in his eyes when he presented his work to Marianne was palpable. "I'm sorry I doubted you, Mum," he said after the presentation, hugging her tightly. "You taught me what true courage is." Laura, now 18 and about to enter art school, had become one of Renaissance's most talented artists. Her pieces, painted with messages of empowerment, were the best sellers. She also began teaching painting to beginners, teaching techniques and, more importantly, helping them find their own artistic voices. Richard's criminal case was finally judged. He was convicted of asset concealment, tax fraud, forgery, and assault. The sentence was 8 years, but with the right to regime progression due to his cooperation with the investigations into the business scheme. Jessica, who had made a plea bargain, was not convicted, but her public image was destroyed. She left Brighton and no one heard from her again. What most impressed Marianne was the impact of the case on national legislation. The exposure of the asset concealment scheme led Congress to approve stricter laws on financial transparency in divorce proceedings. The Smith case, as it became known, became a reference in law schools across the country. But it was on an ordinary afternoon of work at Renaissance that Marianne experienced the moment that would consolidate the true meaning of her journey. A woman of approximately 35 timidly entered the studio. She had downcast eyes, trembling hands, and a posture Marianne immediately recognized. The posture of someone carrying shame and fear. The woman introduced herself as Lucy. She said she had lived for 12 years with a partner who had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny she earned, humiliated her in front of their children and friends. "I saw your interview on television," Lucy said, her voice choked. "I saw how you transformed your pain into something beautiful. I came because I need to believe that I can too." Marianne felt tears sting her eyes. She took Lucy's hand and guided her to one of the potter's wheels. Without saying anything, she placed a piece of clay in the visitor's trembling hands. Lucy looked at the clay with uncertainty. "I don't know how to do anything with this," she confessed. "No one knows at first," Marianne replied softly, echoing the words Mrs. Carman had told her so long ago. "But the clay doesn't judge you, Lucy. We start over, 1 inch at a time, just like in life." Lucy began to mold the clay, her hands gradually calming, her face slowly relaxing. Around them, other women worked on their own pieces, each at their own stage of healing and rebuilding. There was Joanna, who now laughed freely and had regained her self-esteem. Carla, who had started psychology school, inspired by Beatrice. Regina, who had found a better job and was building a stable life for her children. And there was Camilla, who, after collaborating with Justice and undergoing months of therapy with Beatrice, had returned to Renaissance. This time as a genuine participant. She was working hard to rebuild her life and her relationship with her mother, who had also started frequenting the studio. As she watched all those women, working, talking, laughing, Marianne felt a deep peace invade her heart. The warmth of the ceramic kiln heated the room, contrasting with the coldness of the past that no longer haunted her. She had transformed her pain into art, her violence into justice, her silence into a voice. That night, after closing the studio, Marianne was alone for a few minutes. She walked among the shelves filled with pieces in different stages, gently touching each one. Imperfect vases, crooked bowls, unique sculptures. Each piece told a story of overcoming, of starting over, of courage. Her phone rang. It was a message from a television producer asking for an interview for a documentary about women who transformed personal tragedies into social projects. Marianne smiled. There was a time when she would have refused, afraid of exposure, shame, judgment. But now she knew her story was not just hers. It belonged to all women who needed to hear that it was possible to start over. She replied to the message, accepting the interview, and then put away her phone. Outside, night fell over Brighton. The city lights began to turn on, luminous points piercing the darkness. Just like Renaissance, Marianne thought. A point of light for women walking in darkness. Before leaving, she picked up a piece she had made that afternoon. It was a simple vase with clean and elegant lines. At the base, Laura had painted in her delicate handwriting a phrase, "Strength is not in never falling, but in rising every time." Marianne held the vase against her chest for a moment, feeling the comforting weight of the now dry clay. Tomorrow it would go into the kiln, where it would be fired at high temperatures. The fire would transform it, making it stronger, more resilient, just as she had been transformed by the fire of her own ordeal. She turned off the lights in the studio, locked the door and walked to her car. Peter had arranged to have dinner with her and Laura that night. They would have one of those relaxed meals that had become a tradition, where they talked about everything and nothing, where they laughed at the small things in life, where they were simply a family rebuilt and stronger than ever. As she drove through the streets of Brighton, Marianne thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The betrayal, the humiliation, the violence, but also the discovery of her own strength, the building of something meaningful, the transformation of her pain into purpose. She didn't have all the answers. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt, memories that hurt. But now she knew she was capable of facing any storm. She knew she wasn't alone. She knew her story, however painful it had been, could light the way for other women. Renaissance was more than a pottery studio. It was living proof that it is possible to rise from one's own ashes, that broken clay can be remolded, that the fire that burns also strengthens, that women united are unbeatable. And as Marianne drove through the Brighton night with the starry sky above her and the vibrant city around her, she smiled. Not the false, tired smile she had worn for years of an unhappy marriage, but a genuine smile, coming from a deep place of peace and fulfillment. She had found her way. She had transformed her pain into art, her anger into action, her fear into courage, and in the process she had helped dozens of other women do the same. The future was still uncertain, it always would be. But Marianne had learned that uncertainty was not an enemy. It was just another piece of clay to be molded, another opportunity to create something new, another chance to start over. And she was ready, more than ready. She was flourishing. Dear listeners, we hope Marianne's journey has deeply touched your hearts. Just like the clay in her hands, each of us has the power to remold ourselves, to transform pain into beauty, and to start over as many times as necessary. To continue experiencing intense emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other incredible stories of overcoming and courage. You can find it right here. If the story of Renaissance has inspired you in any way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This helps us continue bringing these narratives that celebrate feminine strength. Every day we share unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the human capacity to reinvent oneself, and the transformative power of solidarity among women. We await your comments to hear what you thought of Marianne's story, and if you know someone who needs to hear this message of hope, please share it with them. Until the next story,